What if the most chilling stories of World War II were the ones no one was allowed to tell? Buried by governments, erased from records, and whispered only in shadows, these are not the tales from your history class. These are the secrets they tried to keep hidden. But tonight, we're unlocking the box. And once it's open, there's no going back. The winter of 1942 was unlike any other in the vast wilderness between Finland and the Soviet Union. The frozen forests of Karelia, dense with pine and cloaked in snow, echoed with more than just the howls of wolves. Deep within that icy no-man's land moved a unit that officially did not exist, a rogue battalion known as Suzy Compania, or the Wolf Company. They answered to no high command, carried no proper insignia, and followed a code of silence colder than the air around them. They were ghosts in the snow, born of desperation and hardened by betrayal. Their story began with Lieutenant Arto Niemi, a Finnish war hero demoted after a failed assault on the Svir River. Shamed but unbroken, Niemi vanished into the frontier with a handful of loyal men and a grudge against both Soviet troops and the Finnish generals who had hung him out to dry. As the continuation war dragged on, Niemi's group grew. Recruits came from all sides. Sami reindeer herders with unmatched tracking skills. German deserters fleeing the brutality of the Waffen-SS. Even a Russian NKVD officer, Captain Yevgeny Markov, defected and brought with him vital knowledge of Soviet patrol routes and cipher codes. The group lived off the land, striking only when the odds were in their favor. Their tactics were not traditional warfare. They derailed supply trains using stolen explosives. They infiltrated Red Army camps under cover of blizzards, slitting throats before slipping back into the white silence. Their most infamous action occurred near Lake Ladoga, where they ambushed a Soviet convoy under the guise of a Finnish ski patrol. Disguised in looted uniforms, they lured the convoy into a frozen valley and detonated a series of ice mines beneath them. 50 Soviet soldiers died in minutes. Not a single wolf was lost. The Soviets began to speak of them as demons, uncatchable, inhuman, and always watching. Rumors swirled among Red Army ranks about shapeshifters and cursed spirits sent by the North. Some soldiers refused to enter certain forests after dark. Soviet commanders, embarrassed by their inability to eliminate the group, blamed incompetence among local officers. But even among Finnish command, the Wolf Company was an enigma, both a useful tool and a dangerous liability. Their operations weren't sanctioned. Their successes embarrassed the official army. And they were unpredictable. By early 1943, British intelligence had caught wind of the group through intercepted German communications. MI6 believed them to be a rogue Abwehr unit operating independently, perhaps sabotaging both sides. They weren't far off. The truth was more complex. Niemi's men had brokered a shaky truce with German intelligence. In exchange for equipment, the wolves shared intelligence gathered behind Soviet lines. But Niemi distrusted the Nazis, especially after learning of the Einsatzgruppen's atrocities. When a German officer tried to order the wolves to execute captured partisans, Niemi shot him point-blank and left his body in a frozen lake. Despite their shadowy dealings, the wolves had a moral code. They avoided civilian targets. They fed starving villagers in Karelia and sheltered escaped Soviet POWs. One such escapee, a Georgian conscript named Luka, became their radio operator. He modified a captured Soviet transmitter to send encrypted Morse code messages using a unique system of Sami symbols. The code was never broken. In January 1944, the tide turned. The Red Army launched a full-scale offensive across the Karelian front. The wolves, surrounded and outnumbered, were forced to retreat into the White Forest near the Russian border. There, they made their last stand. Using the terrain to their advantage, they created a gauntlet of traps, tripwire explosives, sharpened ice pits, and rigged artillery shells buried under snowdrifts. For weeks, they held off 3 Soviet battalions. But time was against them. Ammunition ran low. Food became scarce. And the cold, the merciless, gnawing cold, began to take its toll. Frostbite claimed toes and fingers. Captain Markov, the NKVD defector, succumbed to pneumonia. Arto Niemi, refusing to surrender, wrote one final entry in his weather-worn notebook: "We are not heroes. We are what war made us, wolves, born of silence, surviving through shadow. If we vanish, let the snow remember us." On February 17, 1944, Soviet forces finally breached the wolves' perimeter. What they found shocked even battle-hardened commanders. The encampment was empty. Fires still smoldered. Blood stained the snow, but no bodies were found, not of the wolves. Soviet propaganda announced the destruction of the rogue battalion, yet no proof was ever presented. Some said the wolves had died in the night and been buried by their own, lost beneath the snow. Others claimed they crossed into neutral Sweden, vanishing into the northern wilds. Finnish villagers swore they saw figures moving through the forest weeks later, silent, armed, and watching. After the war, the name Susi Campania became a whispered legend among Finnish veterans, half myth, half memory. The official records remained silent. Arto Niemi's name was never restored to honor. No medals were awarded. No memorials erected. In 1987, during a logging operation near the White Forest, a hiker discovered a decayed leather pouch buried beneath an ancient pine. Inside was a water-damaged notebook. Experts later confirmed it was Niemi's. The final pages included a list of names, some Finnish, some German, some Russian, and a single phrase in rough Sami script: "We became the forest." Today, only fragments remain: a bullet-riddled helmet in a museum in Rovaniemi, a blood-stained armband with no known insignia, and the whispered tales of those who fought in a war that left no room for ghosts. But in the endless white of Karelia, when the wind howls through the trees and the snow falls silent, some say the wolves still walk. In the autumn of 1944, as the Allies tightened their grip on Nazi-occupied Europe, a strange anomaly was detected at Bletchley Park, the heart of British code-breaking efforts. A routine sweep of Luftwaffe communications uncovered a single, irregular burst, brief, clean, and unlike anything the analysts had seen. It wasn't Enigma, nor was it the known Lorenz cipher. The signal was tight-band, buried under ambient frequency noise, and coded in a pattern that defied all existing decryption techniques. It repeated once every 47 hours, always at 2:13 Greenwich Mean Time. The analysts gave it a name: Phantom Echo. It became the obsession of one woman. Eleanor Graves was not like the others at Bletchley. A former Oxford linguistics professor, fluent in 7 languages, she had been recruited by MI6 after developing an encryption model based on ancient Greek syntax. At 33, she was older than most of her colleagues, many of whom dismissed her as eccentric. But Eleanor had something others lacked: an instinct for linguistic patterns that bordered on the supernatural. The Phantom Echo's frequency pointed to the vicinity of Wallonia, Belgium, a region still under heavy German control. What baffled British intelligence most was that the signal wasn't consistent with standard military protocol. Instead, it contained linguistic fragments that suggested multiple languages, German syntax, Slavic suffixes, and even tonal echoes reminiscent of Finnish. It didn't make sense. Unless, of course, it wasn't meant to. Graves hypothesized something radical: that the code wasn't a military cipher at all, but a constructed linguistic matrix, an artificial language built to carry encrypted meaning across radio waves, compressing data using nonlinear grammar. Her superiors laughed until she decrypted a 2-word phrase embedded in the pattern. It read, "HC. I see." MI6 took notice. Within days, Graves was flown to a forward station in liberated France, where she met with OSS liaison Richard Blake, a hardened field agent with a reputation for breaking rules and enemies alike. The assignment: locate and neutralize Codebreaker 27, believed to be the mastermind behind the Phantom Echo and an unknown Axis cryptography project known only as Project Orpheus. The trail led to Namur, a bombed-out Belgian city crumbling under Nazi occupation. There, among ruins and rumors, they found whispers of a man with no name. Locals spoke of a ghost mathematician living in the catacombs beneath the St. Auban Cathedral, trading bread for batteries, always listening to the air with a strange copper dish. A priest claimed to have seen him once, pale as chalk, scribbling numbers into a black notebook with his bare hands bleeding from frostbite. As Graves and Blake delved deeper, they encountered resistance, literally. A splinter cell of the German Abwehr was already hunting 27, though whether to silence or protect him was unclear. An ambush on the outskirts of Dinant left 2 OSS men dead, and a chilling message scrawled on a church wall: "Orpheus sings only for the damned." Then came the breakthrough. In a hidden chamber beneath a burnt library, Graves found fragments of notebooks, written in a spiraling code that used visual symmetry instead of syntax. She spent 3 sleepless nights decoding a single phrase: "The signal is me." Her theory solidified. Codebreaker 27 wasn't using a machine to transmit the phantom echo, he was the machine. A savant, perhaps even autistic, who had developed a way to embed meaning into frequencies through breath, intonation, and mathematics. He was the Orpheus of Nazi intelligence, singing chaos into the radio waves. Their final lead came from an unlikely source, a 10-year-old boy named Jules, who claimed a pale man lived in the quarry outside the village, talking to the sky. With partisans holding the village perimeter, Graves and Blake approached the site at night. There, deep in the caves, they found him. He was younger than they expected, perhaps 23. Thin, with eyes that never focused and hands that trembled even when still. His name was revealed only by the ID tag sewn into his tattered coat: Wilhelm Oster. A name erased from Nazi records. Around him, wires strung like spider silk, an array of scavenged radios humming in low tones. He did not speak, but when Graves handed him a pencil, he drew symbols, shapes that folded into each other like origami equations. His message was simple: they are listening. They don't know what I've told. Graves quickly realized Wilhelm wasn't loyal to any side. He had sent the phantom echo as a warning, a riddle meant to be solved by minds not bound by military hierarchy. What he had learned, what Project Orpheus had discovered, was terrifying. The Nazis were developing a code-based artificial intelligence, a language so complex that it could think, respond, evolve. And Wilhelm had turned against them, trying to sabotage the project from within, transmitting pieces of it to the Allies so they could understand, and possibly destroy, it. But time ran out. German forces, tipped off by a traitor within the French resistance, descended on the quarry with brutal efficiency. Blake was shot in the chest, and Wilhelm fled into the tunnels, vanishing like a whisper. Graves escaped with the notebooks and a single wax cylinder recording of Wilhelm's voice, repeating one phrase in perfect English: "The future listens, but it does not forgive." Back in London, the materials were classified above top secret and filed under Alpha 27. Graves was ordered to cease further inquiry. The war was nearing its end. The Allies didn't want mystery, they wanted surrender. Codebreaker 27 was labeled a myth, and the phantom echo signal ceased on May 3, 1945. Eleanor Graves resigned from MI6 the following year. She never published her findings, but in her personal journals, discovered after her death in 1986, she wrote of a dream that recurred every night until her final days. In it, a thin young man stood atop a radio tower as fire consumed the world, speaking in a language no one could understand. Not yet. Wilhelm Oster was never found. His fate remains unknown. But in the backrooms of modern signal intelligence labs, the phantom echo is still occasionally heard, unexplained, untraceable, and repeating the same 2 words Wilhelm sent into the void: Ich sie. By the winter of 1941, London had become a city of shadows and sirens. Night after night, Luftwaffe bombers roared overhead, raining fire and steel upon the capital. Families took shelter in cellars, churches, and most famously, the London Underground. Stations once meant for commuters transformed into crude sanctuaries, echoing with the coughs of the sick and the whispered lullabies of frightened mothers. Among these makeshift refuges, one location stood apart, not for its size, but for its secrecy. Beneath Holborn Station, in a long-abandoned service tunnel, a small group of children vanished from history. Their story began with Miss Harriet Vale, a 38-year-old schoolteacher with a stern brow and a heart of gold. Her school, St. Winifred's Primary, had been bombed in September 1940, killing a third of her students. The survivors were evacuated north, but a handful of parents refused to part with their children. Harriet, against official orders, offered to continue lessons underground. She secured a disused maintenance shaft that ran parallel to the Piccadilly line, convincing a retired underground engineer to wire in electric light and run water through ancient plumbing. By November, the so-called Tunnel School housed 17 children aged 5 to 11, along with Harriet and her elderly aunt, Dora, who served as cook and nurse. They lived in secrecy, protected by a narrow crawlspace that led from a boarded-up maintenance door on Kingsway. It was cold, damp, and claustrophobic, but it was safe. No bomb could reach them, no air raid warden could tell them to move. Harriet taught arithmetic and poetry by lantern light. The children sang songs to drown out the sounds of distant gunfire. They kept records, daily journals, lesson plans, even short stories written by the children. These documents, later recovered by urban explorers in the 1980s, painted a picture of hope in the face of horror. One child, 7-year-old Elsie Moorcroft, wrote, "The ceiling rumbles when the big bombs come. I think God is bowling. Miss Vale says he's winning." But as the Blitz dragged on, strange reports began to surface. Commuters at Holborn claimed to hear music, flute melodies, coming from the tunnel walls. One railway inspector swore he saw children in uniforms walking single file down an access corridor that hadn't been used since 1924. A mother searching for her lost daughter claimed to have heard her voice beneath the platform, singing a nursery rhyme. In January 1941, a German bomb struck a warehouse on Southampton Row, causing a collapse near the northern end of the tunnel school's hidden entrance. Rescue crews found no one. The service tunnel was sealed off due to instability. Officially, the existence of the tunnel school was never acknowledged. Miss Vale and her 17 pupils were listed among the thousands missing during the Blitz. And that's where the story should have ended. But it didn't. In 1943, 2 years after the supposed collapse, an RAF signals unit stationed in London intercepted a low-frequency transmission. It was faint and muddled by static, but a technician claimed to hear a child reciting the alphabet. A is for Anderson Shelter, B is for Blackout. The signal repeated for 7 minutes before cutting off. The RAF dismissed it as interference. Years passed. War ended. London rebuilt. The tunnel was forgotten. Then, in 1981, a group of amateur urban explorers calling themselves the London Rats breached a rusted service door in Holborn during night construction. Armed with torches and crude maps, they ventured into the lower tunnels. What they found defied explanation. The walls were lined with children's drawings, stick figures, Spitfires, bombs with swastikas. A faded Union Jack hung limply from the ceiling. In a far chamber, they discovered a small chalkboard still bearing the words, "Today's lesson, the Thames." On the floor, under a thin layer of dust, were 17 small coats hung on hooks. Nearby, they found a leather-bound journal. It was Harriet Vale's. Her final entry was dated March 4, 1941. The lights flicker now. Dora says she hears voices behind the tunnel wall. I told the children it was just the echo. But last night, I heard it too. They're speaking in a language I've never known. They want us to follow. I don't know what to do. The children say the tunnel is singing. I think we are being called. Terrified, the explorers left and contacted the London Transport Authority. When officials arrived 2 days later, the tunnel was sealed again. They claimed the entryway was too dangerous to preserve and poured concrete into the breach. The journal disappeared from public view. Only one of the explorers, a man named Michael Reeves, continued to speak about what they saw. In a 1993 interview, he claimed that during their exploration, he became separated from the group. While navigating a tight corridor, he said he heard singing, not from his radio or echo, but live, close, children's voices. The song was, "God Save the King." He followed it, flashlight flickering, until he found a dead end. On the wall was written, in childish scrawl, "We're still learning." In 2007, during excavation for the Crossrail project, workers unearthed part of the old service tunnel. Among the rubble, they found a tin lunchbox filled with hand-drawn maps of London, dated 1941, and labeled in a child's handwriting. One map had a single word written over the river. Home. To this day, no one knows what truly happened to the tunnel school. Some believe Harriet Vale led the children deeper into the underground and perished in an undiscovered collapse. Others whisper of experimental sound weapons or lost communication technology tested during the Blitz. The most bizarre theory posits that the children became part of the tunnel itself, lost in time, echoing forever in steel and stone. But at Holborn Station, just past midnight, some commuters still report hearing the distant sound of chalk on a board, or the soft, steady voice of a woman reciting a lesson on the Thames. And once, in 2016, a station cleaner found a drawing tucked behind an old fuse box, a crayon image of a smiling woman surrounded by children, all holding hands. The date in the corner read, March 1941. In the early summer of 1942, as the war raged across the deserts of North Africa, a quiet but urgent message was transmitted from Rome to Berlin. It bore the signature of Benito Mussolini himself, stamped with the crimson seal of the Duce's personal command. Its content was cryptic, yet chillingly direct. Operation Salamander has commenced. Ensure silence. The cargo must reach Tobruk. Within days, 5 Italian merchant vessels slipped out of the port of Naples under cover of darkness, escorted by 2 outdated destroyers and a German U-boat. No fanfare, no press, no naval registry entries. To the rest of the world, the ships did not exist. Officially, there was no such convoy. But across the Mediterranean, in the clear blue waters south of Sicily, they vanished. What exactly Operation Salamander was meant to be remains one of the enduring mysteries of the Second World War. For years, historians dismissed it as a myth, a fabrication by post-war conspiracy theorists. But recently declassified OSS intercepts, long buried in the American National Archives, suggest something far more unsettling. The convoy's purpose was known only to a select few in the Italian fascist high command and a shadowy wing of the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence agency. What's certain is that these ships carried more than food, fuel, or ammunition. Among the manifest entries, most of which were redacted, one phrase appeared repeatedly in ciphered Italian: Carico Nero. Black cargo. The theory that Mussolini was attempting to deliver experimental chemical or biological weapons to Field Marshal Erwin Rommel in North Africa has been widely circulated, though never proven. Some believe the convoy was carrying looted relics and gold from captured Balkan territories. But the most controversial theory, one that sent chills through Allied command when fragments of it emerged, was that the convoy bore components of a German prototype weapon, an electromagnetic device derived from the earliest stages of V-2 rocket research, a weapon that could disrupt enemy communications and perhaps even disable engines. The British never intercepted the ships. Neither did the Allies report sinking any such vessels in the Mediterranean during that time. And yet, the ships never arrived. Days turned to weeks. Rommel, cut off and under pressure, sent desperate telegrams asking when the package would reach him. No response came. Mussolini himself stopped mentioning Salamander altogether. It wasn't until August 1942 that a lone survivor was found. A Libyan fisherman off the coast of Benghazi discovered a half-dead man clinging to the shattered remains of a lifeboat. He wore an Italian naval officer's uniform, though the insignia had been torn off. When brought ashore, he refused to speak for days. Eventually, under questioning by British officers, he identified himself as Ensign Paolo Bellini, radio officer aboard the Santa Elena, one of the convoy's lead ships. His account was fragmented, haunted, and at times incoherent. He claimed that 3 days after departure, the convoy entered an area of silence, a stretch of sea where radios ceased functioning and compasses spun in slow circles. The sky, he said, turned greenish at night. Crewmen began hearing a low-frequency hum that rattled their teeth. One of the German scientists on board the lead freighter, the Lorelei, became panicked, shouting about magnetic resonance spikes and wave interference. On the 4th night, Bellini said the Lorelei simply vanished. No explosion. No smoke. Just a white flash on the horizon and silence. In the chaos that followed, another ship, the Dante A, reportedly caught fire from within, its engines turned red-hot, its bulkheads melting. Bellini and a few others attempted to escape via lifeboat, but the sea itself felt wrong. He described sudden tidal surges, a vortex, and then nothing. He woke up 2 days later, alone. British intelligence dismissed much of his account as trauma-induced delirium, though they did note odd electromagnetic disturbances recorded at nearby naval outposts during the same time window. Bellini was quietly sent to a military psychiatric hospital in Alexandria, where he died the following year. His notes, scrawled on hospital napkins and scrap paper, were boxed and archived. Until recently, they were forgotten. In the 1960s, a French diving team searching for Roman wrecks near Malta discovered something unusual. At a depth of nearly 300 meters, they found the broken hull of a vessel matching the Sant'Elena's profile. The steel was warped outward, as if something inside had exploded without leaving scorch marks. The divers' sonar equipment malfunctioned during the descent, and one reported intense nausea and headaches upon surfacing, common symptoms of electromagnetic exposure. Despite several attempts, the site was never fully surveyed, and eventually classified as hazardous. In Rome, post-war interrogations of Italian officials revealed little. The only known reference to Operation Salamander was found in a personal letter from Mussolini to Galeazzo Ciano, his son-in-law and foreign minister, dated April 1942. The Germans grow impatient. But I will show them our value. The sea will be our crucible, and the future will burn through it. Mussolini's words were typically bombastic, but the reference to crucible has drawn renewed attention from modern researchers. Some believe Operation Salamander was Italy's last attempt to gain equal standing with Nazi Germany, by delivering a weapon so advanced it could shift the balance of the Desert War. Others think Mussolini had grown desperate and was manipulated by German scientists eager to test unstable technology on expendable allies. Whatever the truth, the ships of Salamander never reached North Africa. No cargo was recovered. No confirmation of any German superweapon emerged from the desert. And yet, even now, fishermen near Malta speak of strange things. Lights beneath the sea that move against the current. Instruments that fail when boats pass certain coordinates. A low hum that sometimes rises from the deep on windless nights. Today, a memorial plaque near Naples lists 87 sailors from 5 ships, lost in transit to serve the nation. No explanation. No location. No mention of Operation Salamander. But for those who listen to the whispers of forgotten wars, the phantom convoy sails still, beneath the silence of the Mediterranean, forever lost in a sea that remembers more than it reveals. The Battle of Stalingrad is remembered for its sheer brutality, streets choked with rubble and bodies, soldiers reduced to scavengers, and winter cold so intense it split steel. Yet amidst this crucible of fire and ice, a group of women carved their names into history, only to be buried in silence. They called themselves Żelazne Rosy, the Iron Roses. Official records would later deny their existence. But in the shell-blasted remains of a textile factory near the Volga River, they held the line for 63 days, and the city, perhaps because of them, never fell. It began in October 1942, when the Red Army's 13th Guards Rifle Division took catastrophic losses trying to hold central Stalingrad. With entire platoons annihilated, the Soviet command scrambled for replacements. But there were none. What remained were the factory workers, mostly women, many barely older than girls, who had not evacuated when the Germans advanced. Captain Ludmila Luda Orlova, a veteran of the Winter War against Finland and now a political commissar, was tasked with rallying the remnants of these workers. She found more volunteers than expected. Seamstresses, mechanics, nurses, even students. Some had lost husbands and brothers in the early stages of the siege. Others had simply had enough. They came forward not with speeches, but with grit. Orlova organized them into an improvised unit, Company 8F, though they called themselves Iron Roses. They wore mismatched uniforms, some in padded Red Army coats, others in civilian overcoats with red star pins hammered onto the lapels. Armed with captured Kar 98 KS, worn Mosin-Nagants, and homemade Molotov cocktails, they were assigned to defend a single block, the ruins of Stalingrad's No. 14 textile mill. It was, according to the NKVD's internal report, a symbolic position. Overlooking a narrow rail line, the factory offered no strategic advantage. But to the women who had worked there, it was home. Their first enemy assault came on October 19th. A Waffen-SS reconnaissance unit, emboldened by thin Soviet lines, advanced through the wreckage. The Iron Roses ambushed them from upper windows and collapsed stairwells. In 10 minutes, 12 Germans lay dead. Not a single rose was lost. Over the next week, the attacks intensified. Artillery turned the factory into a cratered tomb. The women dug trenches inside the building. They hung curtains of industrial canvas to obscure their movements and used sewing needles to stitch up wounds and torn uniforms alike. There were no medics. No resupply. Ammunition was scavenged from corpses. When bullets ran out, they used grenades. When grenades ran out, they used bricks. When bricks ran out, they used knives, fists, and fury. Among them was Tanya Goryacheva, only 16, who had lied about her age to stay in Stalingrad. She became the unit's best sniper, with 42 confirmed kills. Her perch was the top floor of the boiler tower, where she painted a single rose for each German she felled. The tower was eventually destroyed in a direct artillery hit, but Tanya survived, buried under rubble for 2 days, clawing her way free with broken fingers. There was also Sergeant Zinaida Voronina, a former boxing champion from Leningrad. She trained the women in hand-to-hand combat and personally led a night raid that recaptured the mill's warehouse from a platoon of Wehrmacht troops. Armed only with bayonets and axes, the Iron Roses overwhelmed the surprised Germans, reclaiming several crates of food and a cache of Panzerfausts. The morale of nearby Red Army units surged. Stories of the women spread across Stalingrad, myths in the making. Some said they drank motor oil to stay warm. Others claimed they sang old Russian lullabies during firefights. A commissar tried to replace them with a proper infantry unit. They refused to leave. When ordered to evacuate, Orlova reportedly told command, "If we die, it will be where we lived. Our machines once made cloth, now we stitch the city back together." But heroism came with a price. By early December, only 14 of the original 43 Iron Roses remained. Rations dwindled to scraps. Frostbite claimed toes and fingers. One woman, Varia Stepanova, was executed by the NKVD after she was caught trying to deliver food to wounded German soldiers in a nearby basement. Orlova tried to intervene but was overruled. That night, the women buried Varia in secret, sewing her body into a roll of factory canvas and placing a single red rose, stitched from leftover thread, on her chest. Their final stand came on January 3, 1943, when a mixed German battalion launched a final assault on the district. Airstrikes turned the textile mill into burning ash. Still, the Iron Roses fought. Tanya, now nearly blind from smoke exposure, guided her remaining comrades by memory through the factory's maze-like ruins. Sergeant Voronina, wounded 3 times, held the main entrance for 7 hours until reinforcements from the 62nd Army arrived. When they did, they found 6 women still alive, barricaded behind looms and sandbags, bayonets fixed, eyes wide and unblinking. After the war, official Soviet history made no mention of Company 8F. Some say it was because the Roses had no proper military training. Others believe the NKVD suppressed the story after discovering Orlova's unauthorized political writings, which criticized the party's treatment of civilian volunteers. Orlova herself vanished in 1946 during the post-war purges. Tanya died in 1951 from lung disease, never recognized for her wartime service. Sergeant Voronina became a boxing coach and lived in obscurity until her death in 1983. It wasn't until 1999, during renovations of a war museum in Volgograd, that the truth resurfaced. A metal box was discovered behind a false wall. Inside were photographs, diary pages, and a red banner stitched with the names of the fallen Iron Roses. A note attached read, *, "We lived as women. We fought as soldiers. Remember us. *. Today, a small plaque sits on the site of the former textile mill. It simply reads, "To the daughters of Stalingrad, the Iron Roses." May the wind carry their names forever. But those who walk the quiet streets of modern Volgograd say that on cold winter nights, when the snow drifts and the city sleeps, you can still hear the faint sound of humming, an old Russian lullaby, echoing through stone and time. Some truths were never meant to surface. But now that you've heard them, you carry them too. These stories weren't lost, they were buried. And when history chooses silence, it's up to us to listen anyway. Remember, what's forgotten isn't gone. It's just waiting in the dark.